Hey everyone, today I'm going to go over a topic I've wanted to cover for a long time, and it's how to add support loops non-destructively using the bevel modifier. I see a lot of people beveling incorrectly, and I want to make a video going over this. So the first thing I want to show you is that in hard surface modeling, or any modeling for that matter, forms are usually an extrusion or they're an inset. Almost every single model follows this. So, I mean, if we have a human, the arms are just an extrusion, the neck is just an extrusion. And when you bake it down, these forms are what a model is made out of. You don't really see too many other varying shapes than this. So how do we non-destructively bevel these? So we don't want to have n-gons, we want to have nice clean topology and a low-res base mesh that we can always go back to if we need to iterate on our model. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to shade smooth, and then we're going to smooth by angle, and it's set to 30 degrees, but you can change this based on whatever your model requires. And it's easy for just quick global coverage of hard and sharp angles. When I'm modeling things, I will always be tagging things as hard and soft as I model, so I can have a close representation of what the final model is going to look like, and it also helps me tag those beveled edges at the end once I've got all my shapes together. So now that we have these sharp edges, we select our edge in edit mode, Shift G, select by sharpness, and that'll just select all of these sharp edges here. And then we can increase the mean bevel weight to 1 under the item menu. I'm just going to untag those as sharp because I've got all of my bevel tags now. Add a bevel modifier, and we'll increase these divisions to 2. And we'll also change the limit method to weight. So it's no longer beveling based on angle, it's beveling based on those weights that we tagged just before. Another thing, we always want to set this to 1. We do not want to add support edge loops with roundness. The reason for that is because it doesn't, when you smooth it, it doesn't maintain these flat surfaces perfectly. I'll show you on a cube here. If I just add that here and I'll just duplicate it, I will add a bevel like this and maybe 0.3 here, and then I'll do the same thing, 0.3, 0.5. We'll shade these smooth, and you can see that the shading looks a little soft on here, and you can see that this is actually, it's not just a flat shape, you know, this is bowing out, right? Versus this one, that is a lot more of a straight edge. And so in order for me to get correct smoothing normals, I would have to add more support loops just to get that same effect as this cube here. Another thing is that if you ever need to, if another artist has to pick up your model and they need to make model changes, it's so much easier to rebuild the base shape by just getting rid of these loops, and I'm back to a cube, versus this. If I have to delete these loops, it changes the actual base shape of the mesh, and that just makes things painful to work with, because when you've got details on flat surfaces, you want that surface to be as flat as possible. So never add roundness to your support bevels. The only time you want roundness is when you are actually changing, you intend to change the silhouette of your model. See, it's like I would add a round bevel there because it physically, it's changing the silhouette. But when I just want to have like highlight bevels and just to maintain these sharp corners here, make sure it's set to 1. It's just the way to do it. Okay, let's continue down the settings here. Geometry, the mitre outer, change that to arc. these settings we can leave as is. Now, here is where the magic happens. Because of how this has been extruded, you can see the topology flow runs kind of like perpendicular to the form. See, these polys flow here, these polys flow here, and I want to have an edge loop going around the base here and flowing around it. And because we've modeled it in this way, what we can do is we can actually insert a triangle right here. And look what happens. Perfect edge flow. And we'll just turn off optimal display. That's perfect. That's exactly what you want. And at any point, I can turn off the modifier. And I've got my base forms where I can make large scale changes. Pull this out, whatever. And yeah, it's just much easier to work with your model like this. So let's just continue on with the rest of the forms that we were discussing earlier. So we'll turn back that bevel modifier. I might just turn the size down a little bit. And then again, the topology flows perpendicular to that sharp corner here. And when it flows perpendicular, you can always insert a triangle. Again, I'll just turn the grid off here so you can see. Bang. That edge flow flows perfectly around with nice, clean topology. Same thing here. Perpendicular topology. And let's just turn this off for a second. Yep. We can put one here as well, perpendicular. And I think there's actually a problem with my mesh here. Let's just delete this quickly. There's something wacky going on. Yeah, there's some internal faces here. We'll just get rid of them quickly. And I'll just turn that weight down to 0. Back to where we were. And then there you go. Perfect edge flow. So you can see how powerful these triangles are. We don't need to, we can have clean topology non-destructively. And obviously the bevel works perfectly well on these shapes here. You don't need to worry about them. We don't need to make any custom topology changes because it will just work. It's mainly for these extrusions and insets that you need to worry about it. But as I was saying before, we want to avoid n-gons, but at the same time, you have to ask yourselves, does it really even matter? Because when I smooth this, it looks absolutely fine. And at render time, this is a quad. When it subdivides, quad, 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 quad. They're all just quads. So it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. You could just leave this mesh as it is, and it would smooth fine, it would UV fine. But if you're a real stickler for your topology and you want to make sure there's tris and quads, if it's an effects mesh, for example, because a lot of effects they can't work with n-gons. So with that in mind, let's just add a couple of triangles here. And there you go. So we have just SubD'd this whole mesh non-destructively. And that is extremely powerful. So in the next step, what we're going to do is we're going to do a piece of armor, a little bit more complex than this, and we're going to apply those same principles to create a SubD ready mesh. So let's move on to that. We'll just fix up that little last bit here. There we go. Bang, done. Let's move on to a more complex object like this armor piece here. I've gone ahead just to save on time, and I've tagged all the edges approximately that I want to be hard and left the ones that I want to be soft. So once again, the fastest way to quickly do broad coverage over your model to get the sharp edges is to shade by angle and then just add and remove and refine the tagged edges. Okay, so let's Shift G select by sharpness. Let's increase the bevel weight, and let's just remove those sharp edges. And if you want to mark sharp and clear sharp, it's in the right click menu. Let's go ahead and add our bevel modifier, change this to weight, segments 2, profile 1, something like that. And then we will have to change our miter outer to arc, and immediately I can see some issues here. You can see that the distance between here and here is much greater, and the reason for that is because loop slide is enabled. I tend to always turn off loop slide personally. It just creates issues on certain junctions. Okay. Cool, let's start refining this further. So as you can see here, there's some perpendicular edge flow, and I know I want this to be hard, so we'll just add triangles there, triangle there, triangle there, and just so you can see what I've done, triangle, triangle. We'll just turn that back on. Again, perpendicular edge flow. And it always pays to turn off the modifier just so you can kind of see what's going on a bit more clearly. So this edge here, instead of attaching this here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue that support loop down into this detail here. So let's increase that bevel weight. And let's make these edges all sharp. So what I'll do is just select these edges, and I'll also continue that same edge flow into this detail here. So we'll increase that. And you can see what's going on. That poly flow has kind of run down here. And then here, I'll add a triangle. So you can see the flow runs around this shape. And just like before, this is just an inset. You know, this is just a corner. These are just repeating shapes that you see in hard surface modeling over and over again. So you'll be very familiar with them. All right, so I want this edge to be hard. So we'll tag that as a bevel. This one also. And this one as well, I'm going to continue that same edge flow like below down to this detail here. Create a triangle here. And I will continue that edge flow down into this detail here, so it just terminates at that junction. And just like the detail below, perpendicular edge flow, so we have that nice poly flow running around. Looks like we've missed a detail here from when we were doing our sharp edges tagging. And you can see we could just leave them here, you know, it's fine. These n-gons here aren't going to create any issues as long as this face is flat. It's really important whenever you're doing any hard surface modeling that if you intend a surface, a plane to be flat, that it is flat. Because anything beyond this line doesn't matter. I could terminate these here, I could shoot edge loops all the way here, but as long as it's contained within this border, as long as it's flat, you can get away with virtually anything. So just keep that in mind. Okay, let's just move on to the other side quickly. We'll just do the same treatment as before, perpendicular edge flow, add our tries here. So now you can see it runs perfectly around that detail. Let's sharpen these edges here. And another thing to note is that you don't want to always rely, or rather you don't need to always rely on the Bevel modifier. Use the existing topology that you have. I could weight this, and I could sharpen that, and it might be fine. but it's just adding unnecessary n-gons and topology. So instead of that, I'll just remove that. What I'll do is I'll just take the existing topology and I'll slide that into place. So it's a bit of a balancing act. It's about what do you build into the base model and what do you build into the non-destructive bevel workflow. Maybe we'll just harden these edges too. Great. See what's going on around here. Okay, let's resolve some other areas. For example, this topology here, it's going to work if we do the perpendicular edge flow methodology on these two corners, because as you can see, that works fine. The edge flow runs, and I can terminate those edges very easily. But the problem is with this, I want this edge to be hard, and I want this edge to be hard. And I can't terminate the edge loop here because I need to have some like edge flow going on around here in order for that to work. So what we're going to do to get around this is I'm going to do the same thing that we did here, where we just continue that edge flow around. I'm just going to turn on auto merge. Just going to delete that, delete this edge ring, and I'll tag both of these and also these few up here. And we've got that one. Tag that. So now when I turn on the modifier, you can see that the edge flow runs down here, and we can have a hard edge both here and here. And just before we continue, I will just dial down the size of this bevel a little bit, just so that we don't get the intersecting geometry. Great. Looks like we're in a pretty good spot. Let's just turn off our bevel modifier for a second here. And we could have left that before, we could have left that as it was, but by adding this triangle here, we get a quad here, a quad here, quad here, quad here. And it just keeps it nice and clean. And when we subdivide, actually I'll just get rid of this loop here. When we subdivide, it's, yeah, just perfect. We could also add some triangles here if we want to avoid these n-gons. That'll work. And, you know, I would probably leave these myself, but just in the spirit of, you know, getting rid of all of the n-gons in the mesh, what I'm going to do is insert an edge loop down here. And the reason is because I want to shoot a triangle on either side here, like so. And I believe that should resolve all of our topology. And there you go, you have a perfect SubD mesh ready to go, or near perfect edge flow. And if I turn off this modifier, that's what it would have been without the modifier. And the reason why it's so nice to have this non-destructive workflow is because a lot of the time you want to get a model reviewed, and in order for someone to cut all of this edge flow in, it would take a very, very long time. And I want to get this mesh reviewed, and before I commit to my bevels, I want to know that they're happy with the model. So being able to just toggle off this modifier, you know, make large scale changes, turn it back on again, and save all of that work, it's just a huge time saver in production. Another thing I want to show is that you don't have to lock yourself into one single bevel width. What we can do is we can actually come down, turn off clamp overlap, so then we can go as big as we want and it breaks everything, which is to be expected. And now what we can do is, like for example, I want this area to have quite big edge loops along here, so we have a smoother transition at the front. And everything else I want to have that same bevel width. So what I can do is select these edges here. Actually, what I'll do is I'll select the bevels first, deselect these, and then let's dial down the bevel weight. And I'll just come down here to see how big we need it to be, something like that. Oh, there's an error happening here. The reason why is because this is set to 1 still. So let's just copy this value and we'll just paste it in to get rid of that spike. And now you can see we actually have really big wide edge loops here and really small ones. So we get a nice soft transition here. So you can mix it up. You're not confined to one bevel width. And that is basically the workflow. If you found this video useful, check out some of my other content on BlenderMarket and Gumroad. And yeah, cheers guys.